Parshas Vayishlach, Parshas Vayishlach, and of course, Parshas Vayishlach starts off by telling about the encounter that Yaakov has with Esav, and then about their going to Sukkos, and then it's going to then the incident of Shechem, and then Yaakov, as a result of the commandment he was given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu initially, even when he was by Lavan, and repeated again, goes back to Beis to build a Mizbeach, to be an altar there. And this is in Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Aleph. Vayomer Elokim el Yaakov, kum alei Beis v'shev sham. V'asei sham Mizbeach lekel hanirei elecha b'varcha b'pnei Esav achicha. So go up to Beis and dwell there, and the Mefarshim are all troubled. What was this idea of dwell there? Why dwell there? It should just say go up there and build an altar, build the Mizbeach. Why dwell there? V'shev sham, reside there, stay there. What was the purpose of all of this? And the Ramban suggests a number of answers. One answer the Ramban gives was, in other words, to rid yourself of the Avodah Zarah, the idolatry. Apparently, when they took the Rechush, they took the possessions of the people of Shechem, when they waged war against Shechem. So among the possessions were objects that were associated with Avodah Zarah, with idolatry. And they had to rid themselves before they did any service at Beis, even before they built the Mizbeach. They had to rid themselves of these objects that were associated or might have been Avodah Zarah itself. And also, in conjunction with that, the Ramban says, because they waged war, they were involved with the people that were killed. They came in contact with the dead, so they had to be metaher themselves. They had to purify themselves. So v'shev sham means to reside there in order to purify themselves. And now, to be honest with you, I have some trouble with this answer of the Ramban. There are, I'm sure there are possible explanations. I could even suggest some myself, but the question is, what's the emphasis for Shev Sham? Should say, and why the Sham? There's a certain focus for Shev Sham. As far as purification is concerned, that did not necessarily have to be at Beis. And as far as ridding themselves of the Avodah Zarah, didn't have to be. It could be it was convenient for them to do it there. But why the emphasis in the Torah, V'shev sham, and sit there, or reside there? And another teretz the Ramban gives, and I think that, and really the Sephorna, I assume on the basis of the Ramban, he goes a little more into it. The Sephorna says, because there is a halacha. There is a halacha that a person before davening should wait a short while to fix his thoughts. The expression of the expression of the English translation is to attune his mind, to tefillah. After all, every person when they come to shul, when they come to daven, sometimes they bring the outside into the shul. I remember when I first became a rabbi in the shul. So when I would come into shul, there were some elderly people. Many of them not observant, but as they got older, at that time they would tend the minyan, Shacharis, Mincha, Ma'ariv. They retired. It was something for them to do, and it did have a positive impact on their lives and to a large degree on the lives of their families. And when I would come into shul, they would be sitting, they would come early, and either they would be talking about the football game, some of them would be talking about the price of bananas, I remember. They would bring the outside, the events of the outside in. It's one thing when we're talking about the events that are happening in Eretz Yisrael, how the Jewish people are being attacked, how the Jewish people are defending themselves. And to a certain degree, the shul has to serve that function. Because if it's done outside the shul, we don't know what they're going to be told. On the contrary, we do know what they're going to be told. And unfortunately, many even of Achenu Beis Yisrael, they get direction in their attitudes from people outside the shul. And when they get their attitudes from people outside the shul, they take positions, and the political impact that they could have, not realizing it, they use it against the interests of the Jewish people, and certainly do not use it to help the Jewish people defend themselves in overcoming those who are trying to destroy the Jewish nation. But when it comes to davening, of course, when we talk about the hardship of the Jewish people, that perhaps is very appropriate in the shul. That perhaps is very appropriate before we daven, if we have the right kavanah. Because the mechayev tefillah, why are we, the essence of the requirement of davening is pleading on God to relieve us of the tzara, of the trouble we find ourselves in. Sometimes those tzaras, trouble that we have personally, trouble that we might have in our family, sickness, and all kinds of other trouble. And davening is a response to that trouble, pleading with HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help. And certainly when it's a tzara that faces all of Klal Yisrael, and the tzara that the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael today face is not just the tzara for the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. It's a tzara for all of the Jewish people. See, we all knew it. But there were people who thought that's more comfortable to make believe that it's not something that affects them. But if there's anything that was demonstrated in the weeks after the Sonei Yisrael of Gaza attacked the Jewish people, we knew it wasn't just the Sonei Yisrael of Gaza. It was the Sonei Yisrael, the anti-Semites all over the world that galvanized themselves in a war against the Jewish people. And to our regret and shame, there were a number of Jews that joined them. A number of people who were Jewish by birth. Some of them, it could be attributed to their instability and their mental illness. And some of them, because they had a very bad self-perception. And unfortunately, even among those, there were those who were dressed as if they were very, very devoted Jews, devoted to the Torah, but their dress was a costume, not a uniform. So, for this reason, it is important perhaps to bring up these subjects in the shul, although generally the shul is dedicated to davening, to learning Torah. But of course, when you deal with issues such as the football game and and other things of that nature, that's not appropriate for a shul. And because of that, and there is a tendency to bring in all the events of the day in the shul. So that's part of Shan Sha'achas, that we wait before we daven. In order to create a separation, we have to leave certain things outside the shul. We should take the shul with us when we leave the shul. But the things that are outside the shul, unless it's something that is pertinent to prayer, to davening, some things that we have to beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help, it's best, other than that, it's best left outside the shul. And if we bring it in mentally, we'll bring it in speech and in talking that is inappropriate for the shul. Anyway, so part of it is to fix our thoughts, to focus on the davening. And from my uncle's shiurim, he doesn't discuss this topic directly, but he says, my uncle talks about mitzvos that represent two types of encounters between God and the Jewish people. There are times where the Jewish people go to God. Going to the Beis HaMikdash, the Shlosha Regalim, and to a certain degree, according to the shiur that my uncle gave, the Yom Tovim represent the Jewish people going to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I think in the Kedushas Levi of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditcheva, he also suggests that uses different words. He uses the words mikan mimata lamaila and mikan lamaila mimata. From down up and from up down. What does down up mean? Down up means the man goes to God. And from up down, God, heaven, comes down to earth. And he says that Yontif and my uncle, using different terminologies and giving other examples, also says that Yontif is a day where Yontif, the Jew, goes to God. My uncle shows with the Shlosha Regalim as an example of that. But Shabbos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us. Shabbos, we speak of Kabbalah Shabbos. We welcome the Shabbos. You welcome someone or something that comes to you. We don't speak about Kabbalah Yontif, maybe Tosfos Yontif, but we don't. Shabbos, we have L'chuna Ranana, and the Rambam discusses about the preparations for Shabbos. He mentions that a person should sit and wait for the Shabbos. He says it's similar, and he's similar to davening. By davening also, a person before he davens should sit and wait. So this perhaps what so we see that my uncle, by Shabbos, by davening and by Shabbos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us, and to a certain degree we welcome HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By Yontif, primarily we go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether it's the Beis HaMikdash or whether it's through Mekadesh Yisrael B'Hazmanim, the Jewish people, sanctifying the new months that in a sense creates that encounter between God and the Jewish people of Yontif. It's the Jewish people going to God. And it's very interesting. There's a Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara in Yuma says that Avram Avinu davened mincha at Chatzos. And the Gemara there is troubled because we know that this man of mincha, we know that this man of the time for davening mincha is a half hour after midday. So how is it that Avram Avinu davened at midday? And the Gemara discusses all kinds of explanations for it. And Tosfos Yeshenim, Tosfos and Brachas, the Tosfos Yeshenim in Yuma, they raise the question as to how can we say that Avram davened mincha, and the Gemara wants to say that that's an indication. Initially, the Gemara wants to say that that's an indication, perhaps, that we could daven mincha at Chatzos. Of course, there are a lot of problems with that. But the Gemara asks, if Avram davened at Chatzos, why is it that we can't daven at Chatzos? That we have to wait a half hour past Chatzos, past midday, to daven mincha? And there are two answers given. One answer is, but the question is, Yitzchak was the one who instituted mincha. So how is it that the Gemara says that Avram daven mincha at chatzos. One answer that the Rishonim give is that Avram davened at chatzos. Avram davened at chatzos at midday mincha after Yitzchak instituted tefillas mincha. And of course, the question then arises, where do we see that Avram davened mincha, especially after Yitzchak? Yitzchak l'suach b'sadeh. This is when Rivka returns, when Rivka comes, and Rivka is about to marry Yitzchak. So the Torah tells us at that point, Vayetze Yitzchak l'suach b'sadeh. And the Gemara tells us that's the time when Yitzchak instituted Tfilas Shacharis. This seems to be toward the end of Avram's life. And there is no mention of Avram davening at that point. So perhaps we're forced to say that they had a Mesorah. I have another a possible explanation, but it's a very long explanation. But another answer given in the Rishonim is that Avram davened mincha. Avram davened mincha before Yitzchak instituted mincha. But Avram, as a general practice, davened mincha even before mincha was instituted as a requirement by Yitzchak Avinu. And when the Gemara says that Avram davened mincha before mincha became an obligation, but it was part of the personal practice of Avram to daven mincha, and as part of that personal practice, he would daven mincha at chatzos at midday. And here, I think, though, we could find a simple source. Not that everybody would agree about it, but we could find a simple source that could serve as a foundation for the assumption that Yitzchak Avinu, that Abraham davened mincha. Because at the beginning of Parshas Vayera, the Torah tells us, Vayera elav Hashem, Vayera Hashem elav, Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei mamre, v'hu yoshe pesach ha'oel k'chom hayom. God appeared to Avram, Pesach Oel, and their entranceway to the tent. And he was sitting, Pesach Oel is sitting by the door of his tent, Kechom Hayom, at the heat of the day. And the Gemara in Brachas tells us that was during the 6th hour, the hour just before Chatzos, that ends with Chatzos. Now, if we say he was just sitting there, as it appears from the Ramban, or that he was sitting there to look for passerbys because he wasn't able, Avram was not able to start a meal unless he was able to invite somebody in to eat. As I think the Daskenim Balatosis points out, except he explains the hours somewhat differently. But I think we could suggest an alternative explanation on the basis of the Gemara in Yuma. Perhaps we could suggest that the Gemara in Brachas tells us that Chassidim Harishonim, it's a Mishnah, in the 5th parak of Brachas, the first Mishnah, Chassidim Harishonim, the early pious people, they used to wait an hour before they davened. They would prepare themselves for davening. In a sense, they would sit. The Rambam mentions that before davening, a person should sit. And Avraham Avinu, in the simple explanation of the pasuk, "V'hu Yoshe Pesach Oel," he's sitting, and he was sitting at Chachom Hayom, and Vayera Lov Hashem, and God appeared to him when Avram was sitting Pesach Oel. And if we take what my uncle said, that by tefillah seems to be a machlokas on this question whether by davening we go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we go to God, or by davening HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us. And my uncle assumed, because of the fact that the Rambam equates preparation for Shabbos, waiting for the Shabbos to come, waiting for the Shekhinah of Shabbos to come to the Jew. And the Rambam uses the same requirements for waiting for Shabbos as he does as waiting for davening. And just as in regard to Shabbos, we wait for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come to us. We go out to welcome the Shabbos, or we sit in our chair waiting for the Shabbos to come. My grandmother, a blessed memory, regardless of how short, can say this in the winter, or how long Friday was, all Friday she would be working, preparing for the Shabbos. But irregardless, even in the shortest of days, when she was all ready for Shabbos, dressed in her Shabbos clothes, and Friday night she didn't go to shul, but she would be sitting down waiting for the Shabbos to come. In accordance with what the halacha that the Rambam mentions, that you sit down and wait. She was waiting to welcome the Shabbos, the Kabbalah Shabbos. And in a sense, I think that this, perhaps, we could explain the pasuk, and I know the Ramban doesn't explain it that way. But Vayera Hashem Elav Be'elonei Mamre V'hu Yoshe Pesach Ol Kachom Hayom, that Avram went to sit down an hour before Chatzos, an hour before midday, in order to daven mincha. So then the question arises: is Avram was sitting down an hour before mincha if Avram was sitting down an hour before mincha to prepare himself for the davening, and this halacha, this halacha my uncle equates on the basis of the Rambam, equates it with the waiting for Shabbos, which is certainly an act of welcoming, preparing for the welcoming of Shabbos. So it's indicative of the fact that by davening, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us. At what point does HaKadosh Baruch Hu come to us? Does he come to us after we started the davening, or he comes to us before we started davening? And the answer could be HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to us as a result of our preparing for the davening. And I think that this is perhaps could serve as a source for Avram that personally davening mincha. So the question then is, so why don't we learn out? Why don't we say Avram, Tikein Tfilas Harvis? Why do we only say he personally davened? And the answer is because, yes, Avram was preparing himself for the davening of mincha. He was preparing himself for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to him. But as soon as HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to him, Avram couldn't daven because he saw three people traversing the desert, and he had to run to help them. Of course, at that point, he didn't know that they were malachim. He didn't know that they were angels. So the Torah doesn't tell us explicitly of Avraham davening. It tells us about Avram's attempt at preparing himself for davening, but he was not able to daven at that moment. That only later, after the Malachim left, was he able to daven. So we could suggest that when do we learn out that the Avos instituted the tefillah when the Torah speaks of them actually davening at a particular time of the day? But here the Torah doesn't tell us of Avram actually davening at Chatzos at midday. It tells us that Avram was preparing for the davening to take place at Chatzos. But the Torah doesn't tell us that he actually davened, and it seems that he didn't actually daven at that moment because of the malachim who were dressed or had the form of travelers in the desert. So, in a sense, the preparing for davening, when the preparing our thoughts for davening, is also not just an act of preparing our thoughts for God davening, but it's according to the way my uncle understood the halacha. It's a halacha of preparing ourselves to welcome the Shekhinah, to welcome HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is coming to hear our tefillas. Tefillas is an encounter. It's not just uttering of words, but it's an encounter. It's a meeting between God and the Jew. Vayifka b'makom. Yaakov Avinu had an encounter at the place, but it wasn't just the place. Makom is also the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Yaakov Avinu, davening was a meeting, and we have to meet. We have to prepare ourselves for the meeting. So this Avram was sitting for an hour, figuratively from 11 to 12, to prepare himself and prepare his thoughts. But by preparing his thoughts, when we do that by davening, if it's to be seen as analogous to the welcoming of Shabbos when we sit waiting for the Shabbos to come, it's preparing ourselves. It's part of the process of welcoming HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he comes to the davening. So we could suggest, even though by the Beis HaMikdash, when we go to the Beis HaMikdash, that is an act of the Jew coming to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but certainly the act of building a Beis HaMikdash, the act of building a Mizbeach. What is the purpose of the Mizbeach? The Mizbeach is the Jew coming close to God. But the building of the Mizbeach, the building of the altar, in a sense, is to create a place for God to come among the Jewish people. And we could suggest even a step further. And we could, first of all, so we could say that that's here also the case. The Shev Sham. In other words, you're building a Mizbeach, and I am going to come there to the Mizbeach. I am going to come to the altar. Because you're going to give Karbonos. And Karbonos is symbolic of you coming to be close to me. But when you build that Mizbeach, by the Karbonos, you come close to me. But when you build the altar, I come there to you. So you should be able to come close to me. So the building of the altar required that the Jew, in a sense, just like he has to prepare his thoughts for davening, so the same halacha applies in building the altar. In other words, he's preparing his thoughts to create a place for God to come there, that in the future that he could afterwards give a carbon and come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and come close to God. But I think it's more than that. Now, there is a machlokes, a dispute between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam says that, let's say now Joshua, when he came to Eretz Yisrael and he captured Eretz Yisrael and he divided the land up among the different Shvatim, he sanctified the land with Dushas Haaretz. And many of the mitzvos that are associated with land became incumbent upon the Jew from a Torah perspective, Midiyaraisa, because of the sanctity that Joshua gave to the land. And then, when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, so he sanctified, as the Rambam tells us, he sanctified the Makom HaMikdash. And then when the Jews went to exile the first time, according to the Rambam, even though Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, lost its sanctity, and the agricultural mitzvos were no longer incumbent during that 70 years of exile on the Jewish people, the Beis HaMikdash, the Temple Mount, retained its sanctity. It would seem that the Rambam's opinion is that the area of the Beis HaMikdash, is the area of the Beis HaMikdash, the Gusha of the Beis HaMikdash, is not dependent upon the sanctity of Israel. Of course, it has to be in that particular spot. But even when there isn't sanctity endowed on the land of Israel, when the land of Israel temporarily loses its sanctity, the site of the Beis HaMikdash retains its sanctity. And it's for this reason, according to the Rambam's opinion, even during those 70 years of exile, between the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash, Eretz Yisrael didn't have its sanctity, but somebody that was Tameh could not enter areas of the Beis HaMikdash that somebody who came contaminated, let's say, as a result of coming in contact with the dead, couldn't eat, in spite of the fact that the Jews were in exile, because the place, the way the Rambam put it, when Shlomo HaMelech endowed the Beis Hamikdash, the site of the temple, with dusha, with sanctity, it was dusha shchina. It was the dusha. It was the sanctity of the presence of God, and the sanctity of the presence of God is a permanent sanctity. However, the Ravid's opinion is that if there is no dusha Eretz Yisrael, if the land of Eretz Yisrael doesn't have sanctity, there can't be Dushas HaMikdash. There can't be sanctity for the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, the sanctity of the Beis HaMikdash, the sanctity of the temple, is dependent upon the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael. And the question could be raised against the Rambam. I've discussed it a number of times. The question could be raised about the Mishkan. The Mishkan was in the Midbar, in the desert. And the desert did not have the sanctity of the land of Israel. And nevertheless, the Jewish people were able to build a Mishkan, even though there was no sanctity to the land.
Is that a question against the Rabbim or against the Ravid?
It's a question. It's a question. It's a question. Excuse me. Question against the Rambam. I'm sorry. The Rambam? It's a question. It's a question. No, it's a question against the Ravid.
Right. Okay.
Question against the Ravid. I said the Rambam. Sorry. So according to the Ravid, according to the Ravid, that the Kedushas Hamikdash is dependent upon the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, on the sanctity of the land of Israel. How could they have had a mikdash? How could they have had a temple in the desert? There was no Kedusha Eretz Yisrael. There was no sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael there. There are a number of answers, and they could all be true. But I just want to suggest one answer now, and that is, we have to understand what is the essence of Kedusha Eretz Yisrael. What is Kedusha Eretz Yisrael? What is it indicative of? Now, we could suggest that Kedusha Eretz Yisrael is expressive of the fact, we could have suggested perhaps, that Kedusha Eretz Yisrael, the sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael, is as expressive and demonstrative of the fact that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. But we can't say that, because Kedusha Eretz Yisrael, the ownership over the land of Eretz Yisrael, was given to Avraham Avinu. And from Avraham Avinu was transmitted to all his descendants, generation after generation. Even during the years when the Jewish people were in Egypt, and there was no Jew in the land of Israel. Technically, the land of Eretz Yisrael belonged to the Jewish people at that time. And Eretz Yisrael did not get the Kedusha in regard to the mitzvos, the sanctity in regard to the mitzvos. It did have the presence of God there, but it did not have the sanctity in regard to the mitzvos until Yehoshua came. And Yehoshua sanctified the land. So what is Kedusha Eretz Yisrael demonstrative of? Kedusha Eretz Yisrael is demonstrative of that Eretz Yisrael is not only the property of the Jewish people as a nation, but Eretz Yisrael is the home of the Jewish people as a nation. It's the residence of the Jewish people as a nation. Before Yehoshua entered Eretz Yisrael was the property of the Jewish people as a nation. But it was not yet the residence of the Jewish people. Now, the question is, does it remain the residence of the Jewish people when the Jewish people go into exile? I have my house in Chicago. And if I travel to another city, Chicago still remains my residence. So how do we perceive exile? Do we perceive exile as the Jewish people changing their residence or losing their residence in Eretz Yisrael, even though the land of Israel remains the property of the Jewish people as a nation? Or do we see Eretz Yisrael that it remains the residence of the Jewish people? And it's the Rambam says that in the first exile, Eretz Yisrael lost its Kedusha. Why? Because the first exile, the Kedusha came as a result of conquest. And the impact of conquest only lasts as long as the effect of the conquest is there. When Yoshua came, and Yoshua, the Jewish people coming in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, we see in the Gemara, was more dramatic. And there were more miracles involved than there was in the second Beis Hamikdash when Ezra went up. But nevertheless, the Jews settled in the land through conquest. And when the conquest was over, meaning when the Jews went into exile, the impact of the conquest was over. But when the Jewish people, the Rambam says, came up the second time, their sanctification didn't come as a result of the conquest. Their sanctification came through chazakah. Chazakah means going on the land, working on the land, living on the land. And it's true, in the first Beis Hamikdash, they lived on the land, but it was after the conquest. So it was a continuation of the conquest. But when they went up the second time, it wasn't with an army. An army wasn't necessary at that time for them to enter Eretz Yisrael. They had permission from the king to go to the land. Consequently, the impact of living on the land, that was a permanent impact. So the Kedusha of the second Beis Hamikdash of the Eretz Yisrael existed. The Kedusha of the second Beis Hamikdash exists even to this day. The Kedusha that the Jewish people, of Eretz Yisrael in the second Commonwealth exists even to this day. Now, the Kedusha. So why? In other words, Eretz Yisrael remained, even through the 2,000 years of exile, it was not only the property of the Jewish people as a nation, but it was the residence of the Jewish people. And even when there were situations, the Rambam says, there will never be a time when there'll be less than 10 people, 10 Jews, less than 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael. But even when there are only 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael remains the residence of the Jewish people. And so I think the shita of the question is now, as far as the Rambam's opinion, actually, the Rambam's opinion, I think, is not that the Rambam held that Yerushalayim at Beis Hamikdash retains its kedusha. It retains its sanctity. But in order to get its sanctity, it needs Kedushas Hamikdash also. But, it needs Kedushas Eretz Yisrael also. But when the Jewish people came up with the Second Commonwealth, they sanctified Eretz Yisrael again. Why is it that way? Because it says, "Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham." The halacha is the Beis Hamikdash has to be built in order that be a residence among the Jewish people. The Beis Hamikdash, God's residence, has to be part of the residential area of the Jewish people. So, but the Mikdash retains its kedusha. In the Midbar, in the desert, the Jewish people were the halacha was they had to reside around the Beis Hamikdash. They had to reside around the Mishkan. They had to right. For Asuli Mikdash V'Shachanti B'Socham. The residence of God has to be among the residents of the Jewish people. There might not have been Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, but there was residency of the Jewish people, halachic residency of the Jewish people in the desert. Consequently, the Mishkan, they were able to have a Mishkan, they were able to have a Mikdash in the desert because that was God's residence among the residents of the Jewish people. And the Ravid's opinion is that in the desert, they were also, even though he says it's dependent upon Kedushas HaMikdash, Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, it's dependent. You can't build a Mikdash unless you have the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael there. But the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael manifests, the significance of the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael is that it's considered the residence of the Jewish people. So the Ravid Shita is that in the desert, they were able to have a mikdash because in the desert, there was no Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, but nevertheless, it was va'asli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham because the Mishkan was set up in the area where the Jewish people would be residing. So it's a halacha residing. I think that perhaps we could explain the pasuk in this week's Sedra. El Yakum Ale Beis El, go to Beis El, V'shev Sham, and reside there. Va'asei Sham Mizbeach. This is, in a sense, a blueprint for the future. God doesn't want a temple separated from the Jewish people. God doesn't want the residents separated from the Jewish people. The whole purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is for the Mishkan and for the Mizbeach is for the Jewish people to come close to God. So V'shev Sham, sit there, reside there, then build the Mizbeach. We have to emphasize that the purpose of the Mishkan is for God to be amongst the Jewish people. And this is why when Yaakov went to Beis Kel, so he's told, Shev Sham, reside there, then Va'aseh Sham Mizbeach, and then make a Mizbeach. Yes, beforehand, Abraham, Yitzchak, they made Mizbechos. We don't see that they necessarily resided or that there was a halacha of their residing there. But here there was a halacha of their residing, of their sitting there, of residing. Why is it that way? Because Yaakov, more than the other two avos, represent the Jewish people. And the Medrash says, you take a look, Avraham refers to the Beis Hamikdash as a mountain. Yitzchak refers to it as a sadeh. And Yaakov refers to it as a bayis, as a house. Now, Beis could be understood as a house, and Beis could also be understood as a home. Now, we've had a lot of storms lately. And when you look at the news, they'll show you destroyed houses, broken houses, bricks and wood spread all over. And you see the residents very often standing there and they say, we're going to rebuild. A house is made out of wood. It's made out of bricks. It's made out of cement. A home is made out of more than just that. A home has feelings and emotions. And according to, we can understand the Shita, the Beis Hamikdash, so long the Beis Hamikdash exists. Once the Beis Hamikdash is built, certainly according to the Rambam Shita, it still retains the halachic status of a Beis Hamikdash, even though the walls are destroyed. Why is it that way? It's that way because the Beis Hamikdash is not just the house of God, it's the home of God. And a home, even when it's destroyed, a home is not just made with bricks and stone and wood and whatnot. A bricks is made with feelings, emotions, commitment, and feeling. A home is made with feelings and emotions. The Beis Hamikdash is not just the house of God; it's the home of God, and it's a home of God because the home of God, it has to be among the homes of the Jewish people, and Eretz Yisrael. The Kedushas Eretz Yisrael is there because this is the area of the homes of the Jewish people. And even when the Jewish people weren't there, we could say, according to the Rambam, that it's based on chazakah, because the Jewish people establish it as homes, not just as a perpetuation of conquest, but as homes. So it retains its status as a home of the Jewish people. And that's what we have to know, that all the areas of Eretz Yisrael, they are our home. We have to have that feeling that even though there are storms, even though the houses of the Jewish people were burnt, but Eretz Yisrael still retains its status of the home of the Jewish people. And in the midst of the homes of the Jewish people is the home of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Beis HaMikdash. And that is why V'shev Sham, dwell there, V'aseh Sham Mizbeach, and then make a Mizbeach. Because you have to understand that the purpose the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash and the Mizbeach represents the Beis Hamikdash is for God to be among the Jewish people.
Hey, put questions in chat, please. And I could think of a few reasons, but why do you say that Yaakov represented Bnei Yisrael more than Yitzchak or Abraham?
Well, first of all, he had the family of the Shvatim. That's the first thing. He was the father of the Shvatim. Second thing is because you see Abraham among his children, he had Yishmael. Yitzchak had Esav, and Yaakov, it was it was complete. Mitaso Shleima. And you see that Yaakov has the name Yisrael, and we are called Bnei Yisrael as a nation.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe the people at Shul were talking about the price of bananas. They knew what they were saying we needed daven for parnasa to pay for the bananas,
I did get that impression. These were retired people. They didn't have to work.
but they had to pay for the bananas.
Okay.
I mean, I think the Meshech Chochma when right before Beis when they were coming back and Yaakov told them Hasiros al Ha'anechar Asher B'Sochachem, they were had to remove they were wearing shatnez or something, and now they were entering Eretz Yisrael, like the Ramban Shita that they had to keep all the mitzvahs inside of Eretz Yisrael. So it was identified as Eretz Yisrael.
But that was already after they entered Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah. Yeah, there aren't any other questions. So thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.